Evening, everybody, or good afternoon for the other people hearing us from the other side of the ocean. I am Amedeo Spagnoletto, the director of the National Museum in Ferrara, and this is the second event that we are going to start this evening, together in partnership with the Schara Tzedeck, the congregation led by Rabbi Rosenblatt that is here with us, and from his impulse, really, we are having this second meeting right now in the week of Tisha B'Av, and we organize it in order to underline, to highlight this sad and this tough period for the Jewish people, and speaking about some issues, some themes that are connected with the troubles that our people had and remember during this time of Tisha B'Av. And as you know, our museum is placed in Ferrara, and who advised me, Rabbi Rosenblatt, just to share with you one of the pictures that are shown in our museum in Ferrara, connected with the troubles of the Jewish nation and in Italy during this period. And with your permission, I would share something. Okay. And here, okay, I think that you can see these pictures. That is the worship on, as you see, the martyr of San Simonino. San Simonino is the result of the blood label that we had in Trento in 1475, that somebody of many of you remember, that determined some really troubles and the killed of more than 10 people there in Trento. Just to note that this worship about San Simonino held in Italy until the 1965, when the church determined that was not true and was a blood libel about the Jews, and determined also the not presence of the Jewish people in Trento for more than 4 centuries in the city of Trento. And already, right now, there is not Jewish community in Trento exactly about for this blood libel that happened on the end of the 15th centuries. This is one of the pictures that can bring us in the determining the atmosphere of these days. And I'm going to give the floor to Rabbi Rosenblatt for presenting our host this evening, our guest, Martina Mampieri, the professor in Sorbonne University in Paris, that will speak us about the troubles of the Jewish in Ancona and the martyrs killed there in the middle of the 16th centuries. So thank you so much for all the people joining us this second event, and I prefigure to everybody that we will have another third meeting in few months ahead. And thank you, Rabbi Rosenblatt. I give you the floor to for a little introduction to Martina Mampieri.
Okay, thank you, Rabbi Spagnoletto. I'm just going to pick up a little bit where Rabbi Spagnoletto left off, because I had the privilege last week of visiting the museum. And the truth of the matter is, until I visited the museum, I didn't really understand it. Here in Vancouver, we have a Holocaust education museum. And I know there are people who are perhaps around the English-speaking world. In Washington, D.C., there's a National Museum of the Holocaust. There's Yad Vashem. There are various museums that tell the story of the Holocaust. And certainly one of the missions of those stories is to help people understand the danger of hate speech and oppression, and to present a lesson to the world to hopefully inoculate it against such kinds of oppression. The museum in Ferrara is a similar kind of museum, but it is unique in one aspect. It tells a story that is not of 12 years of Nazi power. It is not even the the story of maybe 50 years of leading up to World War II. It is a story of thousands of years. It starts with the gravestones of Jewish slaves that came over from the destruction of the temple, and it continues on. As you saw the picture of Simon of Trent, you have just a very deep picture of the Italian Jewish story. And lest you think this is not your story, all you Ashkenazic Jews out there should understand that you are Italian Jews. Ashkenazic Jewry started from the journey of a small number of families from the north of Italy into the Rhine Valley. And that's how we, as Ashkenazic Jews, got born. The story and the physical evidence of this story, not just in the museum, but throughout Italy, is absolutely fascinating. And I wanted to do this particular event because the story of the oppression of the Jewish people, especially under the hands of the church, is broad and far. Maybe the most famous of which is the expulsion of the Jews from Spain. But the story in Italy is intertwined with that story and also has its own interesting dimensions. And I'm so glad that we have a resource like the museum in Ferrara to be able to access scholars like Martina Mampieri. Martina Mampieri is part of this this next generation of scholars who are digging into the nitty-gritty, into the human stories of the early modern period. And she has brought this story to life from a manuscript that was found by another scholar whose name is Isaiah Sohn. And she is a professor at the Sorbonne in Paris, and she's also raising the next generation of scholars, really someone who is at the forefront of academia and knowledge. And we're very privileged to be able to hear this very riveting story. This story, just to put a little context on the story for everyone, this story is taking place at the same time as the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, is coming to be born. At the same time as the Kabbalah of Tzvat is starting to take over the Jewish world. It is a real turning point in Jewish history, and this story is actually connected to all of them in different ways. And we're very fortunate to be able to hear the story. I will not take any more of Professor Mampieri's time, and just thank Rabbi Spagnoletto and thank Professor Mampieri for sharing with us today.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, I'm going to share my screen so that all of you can see. Can you see that?
Yes, we see.
Perfect. Okay, thank you very much to Rabbi Spagnoletto and Rabbi Rosenblatt for the invitation. I'm very glad to be here. Also, thanks to Rachel Silvera for her patience all over the last few months. And of course, thanks to all of you who are here on a Sunday evening, just before the final of the World Cup. So I'm very happy to be with you and share my research. The title of my presentation is Stormy Waters and Unsafe Harbors, the Dramatic Experiences of Italian Jews during the Counter-Reformation, which is a topic I largely explored in my PhD. And also in my publications. This history of the Sephardic presence in Ancona dates back to the end of the 15th century. After the expulsion from Spain in 1492 and from Portugal in 1496-97, Jewish communities faced a stark choice, conversion to Christianity or exile. Many Sephardic Jews, and here I use the Sephardic term to indicate the Jews coming from the Iberian Peninsula, so the Spanish and Portuguese Jews, as Sefarad is the ancient name for Spain. So many Sephardic Jews left the Iberian Peninsula and looked for new places to rebuild their lives. Among them were also many conversos, the new Christians, known as in Spanish as Cristianos Nuevos, or is in Portuguese Cristãos Novos, and they were Jews who had formally converted, so they received baptism, more or less forcefully, and I would say more forcefully than less forcefully. So they received baptism in a formal way, but they continue to live as Jews in fear of the Roman Inquisition and the Spanish Inquisition in Spain and Portuguese Inquisition in Portugal, and later the Roman Inquisition in Italy. So you can see here in the map Ancona on the coast, on the Adriatic Sea. So we have major centers, major communities in Rome, of course, in Ancona, in Venice, in Bologna. But, and you can see here, like with some arrows, the movement of people. So lots of people came from the Sephardic, from the Iberian Peninsula, so from a Sephardic background, and they settled in Rome, but they also settled in Ancona, especially from the south, coming from the south, because the Kingdom of Sicily and the Kingdom of Naples belonged to the Spanish crown. So Jews, Sephardic Jews, were also forced to leave the country, and so they moved up to the Marche. So the papal states, a small part of the papal states on the coast of the Adriatic Sea. But not only, because Ferrara was was a city of a great community, a very tolerant place, which hosted lots of Jews from Sephardic background. And other Jews also left the Iberian Peninsula to settle in the northern coast on the coast of North Africa, then moved to Italy as a temporary place or as a permanent place. But the final destination was often the Ottoman Empire, because there they could actually return to Judaism without any problems. So Ancona, why Ancona was important? Ancona was an important center for Sephardic settlement. It had a strategic position. You can see it is located on the Adriatic Sea. It had a big port, a very important port, because it was the second port for importance in the Adriatic Sea after Venice. So all the commerce was happening through Venice and Ancona. So one of the other reasons is that Ancona became an attractive place for the tolerant climate. In 1532, when the city came under direct papal rule, the papal authorities issued a safe conduct, a charter guaranteeing freedom of movement, the right to settle, and the public practice of Judaism. This charter was intended not only to the Jews, was intended to the Levantine Jewish merchants, the Turks, also Greeks, and in general Sephardic people, Sephardic Jews, with the intention of stimulating the trade through the port of Ancona. The document doesn't mention explicitly the conversos or Marranos. So Marranos, sometimes we find in documentation the naming of Marranos, which was a derogatory term for conversos, as Marrano in Spanish, in Old Spanish, was referred to the Muslim who converted, and Marrano came in Spanish indicated the pork, but came from Arabic, mahram, a forbidden thing. So the Marrano term then became also an equivalent for converso. But I prefer using the term Cristianos Nuevos or Cristaos Novos or New Christians, conversos, rather than Marrano. So in 1532, there was the issue of this first safe conduct to allow the Jews and the conversos in Ancona. And these Levantine Jews were coming from the Ottoman Empire and from the Balkans, from what is today Croatia, like the countries on the Adriatic Sea, on the other coast of the Adriatic Sea. And the Sephardic Jews, so the conversos and the Sephardic Jews and the Levantine Jews, were not easy to be distinguished. So this legal and social ambiguity worked in the favor of the conversos, the Portuguese conversos coming from the Iberian Peninsula, and many of them settled in Ancona and gradually integrated into the city's commercial and Jewish networks. In December 1534, so 2 years later, a second papal safe conduct issued by Paul III, who was the Pope back then, expanded these privileges even further, extending them to a wider group of foreign merchants. So you can imagine that this created a favorable environment for international trade, the development of the port of Ancona and its role in the Adriatic Sea, and for the growing of the Sephardic presence. By 1549, we see a major turning point. So the Municipal Council of Ancona signed an official contract with the Portuguese nation that is officially named in the document the Nassau Portuguesa to set up a loan bank. So this agreement marked the beginning of a strong Portuguese influence over the city's economy. And in this context, we have commerce, migration, community structures intertwining. We have also the continuation of the development of Sephardic life. So here in this slide, you can see two synagogues, the two main synagogues of Ancona. One, the Levantine synagogue today in Via Stagno. So it's a synagogue of Spanish, Portuguese, so Sephardic rite, and the Italian synagogue of Ashkenazi origin. So the Levantine Jews, the Levantine and Sephardic Jews, were sharing the same rights and the same customs, while the Italian so-called local synagogue was the product of migration, or previous migration, of bankers, of merchants, of Jews coming from the north. So the empire, the Holy Roman Empire, who, like Jews, who were expelled during the end of the 14th century after the plague, after 1348, so the Black Plague, so the Black Death. Jews, Ashkenazi Jews, progressively turned towards south in the direction of Italy. So we have a major fraction between the communities, because the communities didn't get along very well. I would say that. In 1553, Julius III, so another pope, reconfirmed the privileges for the Sephardic Jews, for the Sephardic conversos, Sephardic people in general. And we have the Sephardic community of Ancona, that is in in Latin documents and official documents. It is named the Universitas Hebreorum Lusitanorum Seu Portugallensium. And this community counted a good 100 of families with a synagogue of Sephardic rite, which again was in rivalry with the local community of Ashkenazi origin. 2 years later, the situation changed dramatically. Paul IV was elected to the throne, to the papal throne. So Giampietro Carafa was his name before becoming pope. He came from Naples, from the region of Naples, from an aristocratic family, and he was himself a co-founder of the Theatines monks, a very restrictive order. it was a person, when he was elected, he was already very old. He was 79. And his health was pretty fragile. But the moment he arrived to power, he decided to have one goal, meaning the restoration of purity of the church. This was just in the middle of the Counter-Reformation. So Paul IV acted to eradicate any heretical ideas, movements, and streams of people who were not in line with the orthodoxy of the Catholic Church. So Jews were also at the heart of his concerns. So we need to imagine that this Pope was someone particularly strict with himself, with the Roman people in general, like the people living in Rome and in the state of the church. We have many chronicles, many accounts of the disappointment and the suffering of people, Christian people, not Jews, Christian people disappointed with the pontificate, with the imposition of heavy taxes, and the restrictions posed for example, the organization of the carnival games, which were at the heart of sociability in the early modern society and in the early modern Roman setting. So it was a very strict person in general, with not only with the Jews, but when it came to the Jews and to the conversos, we have really something unprecedented. So he was also, before becoming Pope, he was the head of the Roman Inquisition, and he was also the promoter of the establishment of the tribunal of the Holy Inquisition. So in 1543, he pressured the Pope, Paul III, to issue a bull, so the Licet ab initio, to establish the Roman Inquisition. But he was also personally involved in the burning of the Talmud. So in 1553, he ordered the confiscation of the Talmud in Rome. So here you can see in the slide just a picture of Campo dei Fiori, so a very important square in Rome. And you can see also the statue of Giordano Bruno, who was burned at the stake in 1600. It's a different story, but you can see very clearly that when we have here like two different episodes, but they are linked in the same square, because in that square today it's a beautiful market, it's a touristic attraction, but back in the days, Campo dei Fiori was a place in which burnings were happening. So in 1553, we have the burning of the stake of the Talmud books. And Paul IV back then, it was Gian Pietro Carafa. So the Cardinal Carafa was responsible for this action. So you can have already an idea who he was, how he acted. So after his election, Paul IV first political act was the issue of the Cum Nimis Absurdum, which is a central bull to understand Counter-Reformation. So in the Cum Nimis Absurdum that was issued on the 14th of July, 1555, so Paul IV was elected in May, the very end of May, and the very first political act of his pontificate was the issue of the Cum Nimis Absurdum a month and a half later. With the Cum Nimis Absurdum, we have a series of restrictions, very heavy restrictions against the Jews, and most importantly, the establishment of ghettos in the state of the church, namely in Rome and Ancona and Bologna, and in other places, of course. but the main ghettos were in these three cities. So lots of other impositions were of course, the imposition of the yellow badge, of a distinctive badge or a yellow hat. The restriction of working and in specific trades and crafts. The restriction, for example, for Jewish physicians to heal Christian people. The imposition, for example, also of not having private property, or not having Christian handmaids or servants. So you can imagine that the situation dramatically changed with the imposition of this law, of these sets of law. So the ghetto, of course, was established in Rome, but it was established also in Ancona. And here you can see some pictures. So a year later, around April 1556, one of the darkest chapters in the history of Italian Jewry after the Shoah. So this is after the Shoah. This is probably the darkest page in the history of Italian Jewry. In 1556, we have the burning of the stake of 26 Portuguese Jews who had received the baptism in Portugal and who returned to Judaism in Italy because of the laws that were issued by the popes. So they were perfectly fine, in line with the impositions and restrictions issued by the popes before Paul IV. And when Paul IV came to power, the situation completely changed for these people. So why is that so? So according to the canon law, so the law ruling the Catholic Church, even forced baptism was considered valid. So it was considered valid according to the canon law, because every sacrament is valid ex opere operato. So anyone who had returned to Judaism was judged not as a Jew, but as a Christian heretic. This meant that their cases fell under the jurisdiction of the Roman Inquisition. Paul IV ordered a sweeping investigation to identify the so-called Marranos, the conversos, and he sent a special commissioner. So Giovanni Vincenzo Falangonio was appointed in late July 1555. So you see, immediately after they issued the Communimis Absurdum, and he acted very quickly. By early August, about 90 conversos in Ancona had been arrested, and under torture, many confessed to having been baptized in Portugal. But Falangonio's mission collapsed when he was caught helping dozens of prisoners escape in exchange for a large bribe. He fled, and his role was taken over by Cesare della Nave, and then by Vincenzo da Lugo, a Dominican friar sent by the Pope to restore the order. Despite diplomatic efforts to resolve the crisis, the Roman Inquisition ultimately condemned the Ancona conversos. Paul IV personally oversaw the trials. Between April and June 1556, were burned at the stake at least 24 and possibly up to 27 people were burned at the stake in Ancona. Another group of people, including a physician named Francisco Barbosio, abjured their faith and were sent to the galleys, though some managed to escape to Pesaro, to Ferrara, and eventually to the Ottoman Empire. So their stories have been studied by many people, many scholars, from the end of the 19th century to these days. I would like to mention the book of my friend and colleague Luca Andreoni, whose PhD thesis was exactly about the Levantine and Sephardic merchants from the Jewish community of Ancona, was published in 2019. And more recently, an article by Giacomo Mariani and Dario Tarraborrelli. So this article is based on new documentation discovered in the state archives of Ravenna by them. So they found over 300 folios related to the inquisitorial proceedings, and I hope this research will offer much clearer insight into this episode, and especially into the role of Cesare della Nave and his notary, whose figures have been largely unknown until now. At the same time, the publication and translation of several Hebrew sources has greatly enriched our understanding and of how Jewish communities interpreted those events as an act of Kiddush Hashem, a sanctification for of God's name, so martyrdom. And I would like to mention my forthcoming publication on this subject. That will be out hopefully in September or October, as far as I know. So in which I reconstructed the signification of the Kiddush Hashem in the context of the episode of Ancona. So we have Christian sources, and both Christian and Jewish sources talking about the event of Ancona in 1556. So the Christian sources, for example, a very important Christian source is an unpublished chronicle by Bartolomeo Alfei, a local historian, a local scholar, who wrote the Annali di Ancona, which is a manuscript. It remained manuscript. It was never published, and it's preserved in the state archives and in the historical archives of Venice. So Alfei talks about 26 conversos who were burnt at the stake. Jewish sources have several opinions about the number. Some Jewish historians, such as Yosef Cohen and Shlomo Chazan, talk about 24 men and one elderly woman. And Gedalia Ben Yachia, who was the author of the Shalshelet Kabbalah, mentions 23 men and one elderly woman. In my research, in my PhD, I worked specifically on a source, on this particular manuscript, the Divrei Amici Pifior Paolo Arrevi Anikra Teatino. So it's the Chronicle of Pope Paul IV, named the Teatin. That is a chronicle written in the second half of the 16th century. Sorry, or even better, it was written. The very first part was written during the pontificate of Paul IV, and the final part was written immediately after the death of the Pope. So the author is Benjamin Nehemiah Ben Natan from Civitanova Marche. Civitanova Marche is a very small place, a very small city on the coast, 40 kilometers south to Ancona. So this author, Benjamin Nehemiah, in Italian is also named Guglielmo di Diodato, was a moneylender. He was a moneylender coming from a family of merchants and from a family of tailors. So he was very involved in trade and money lending between Civitanova and Ancona. He himself was caught by the Inquisition because so he was falsely accused by some slanderers of the Jews, local slanderers in Civitanova Marche. Both him and his brother and other 4 Jews were taken into chains to Rome in the very end of Paul IV's pontificate, so July 1559. So they were taken into chains to Rome, and they spent roughly a month in the Inquisition prisons in Ripetta. And in the end, they were liberated by the angry people of Rome at the death of the Pope. So on the 18th of August, 1559. So this chronicle is extraordinary because we have lots of sources. First of all, we don't have the original manuscript. So the only extant manuscript reserved in the National Library of Israel is a copy from arguably from the beginning of the 19th century. We don't have an idea of where the original was, but my PhD thesis was aimed at verifying that this chronicle was not a forged manuscript. It was not an invention from the 19th century popping up from Jewish communities. I verified that all the content is reliable, and by to do so, I crossed lots of sources from the local archives, from Civitanova, from Ancona, Pesaro, Rome, and the Vatican, and the Hebrew text. So this manuscript was found in 1930 by Isaiah Zonne. So Isaiah Zonne was a scholar from Galicia, Poland. He was born in 1887. Then he spent 20 years in Italy. He lived in Florence. He was someone who was visiting lots of archives and libraries. He was a collector. He was also a book dealer. And he had a huge knowledge of manuscript sources, and chronicles. So in my PhD, I first of all got my hands on his edition from 1930, and then I went back to the source and tried to understand how how Zonne found the source. So in the introduction that he published in 1930, he just said, I found this source like 6 months ago. I cannot say who told me, who gave me the permission and the access to this source, to this manuscript, but I managed to copy the full manuscript, and now I decided to publish it. That's it. So that's why I try to dig into his personal archives in Cincinnati and in Jerusalem, because he had a very complicated story. And in the end, he was in Italy. Then, because of the race laws, he was forced to flee in 1938. So he moved first to Jerusalem, and then he moved to the United States as a refugee scholar. In 1940, he joined the Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati, and he died there in 1960. So what I'm trying to do is write his biography, because I really got interested in this scholar. And I found amazing sources and correspondence that I would like to publish. Yeah, so now we go back to the 16th century. So in my work, in my PhD, I translated the full manuscript, and I also crossed the comments and the information that Zonne was giving in his publication, in his own publication from 1930. And I provided an English translation, and you can see here an excerpt from my book. So according to Benjamin Nehemiah Ben Natan, we have information of specific phases of the burning of the Portuguese conversos. So on the 13th of April, we have 4 men and an elderly lady who were strangled and later burned at the stake. We're talking about 1556. 15th of April, so the next day, 2 more men faced the same fate. On the 18th of April, 6 more individuals endured this horrific destiny. And here in the slide, you can see another text related to the suicide of another prisoner who was not burned at the stake because he took his life just immediately before being burned. So Benjamin, so the author talks about talks about a specific person. And he said lots of things. So he talks about a first-hand description. So he was an eyewitness of what he saw. So you can see here he jumped, I quote, he jumped out one of the high windows in the court where they were imprisoned, and he fell to the ground and bitterly died. May his soul rest in heaven. He was left there lying on the ground all night until the morning, and early in the morning. The Jewish residents of the land were told about this, and they obtained the commissioner's permission to carry him away and bury him in the Jewish cemetery. May his death would be his resurrection, and may the Lord forgive him. May his soul be bound up in the bond of life. My eyes saw this and were afflicted because I saw his carcass lying on the ground underneath the window and wrapped in a garment. Then I watched, my heart melted and became as water, because my bowels scorched for him, and I did not wish to write his name, nor the name of his people. So this guy, this man was actually identified later as David Romero. So David Romero was an important surgeon who underwent baptism in Portugal. So here I just give you a slide, an image of the cemetery, the old Jewish cemetery of Ancona on Mount Cardeto, or Campo degli Ebrei, so the field of the Jews, which was active from the beginning of the 15th century. And it was in 1863 was used, so the surrounding area was used for fortifications. And so the Jews had to dismantle the Jewish cemetery, and they were given a new graveyard, so the Cimitero delle Tavernelle, that is still in use today. After the burning of these first 12 individuals, the Sultan, Soliman I the Magnificent, addressed a letter to Ancona, urging the rescue of the remaining detainees, as among these prisoners were Levantine Jews, mistakenly apprehended under the assumption that they were conversos. And notably, among them were subjects of the Ottoman Empire and commercial agents of the businesswoman and matron of the arts, Doña Gracia Nasi, who had been baptized as Beatriz de Luna Mendez, but later reverted to Judaism in Constantinople. The Sultan sent two letters, one to the Pope and another one to the governor of the Marca, so the region of Ancona, urging them to release the individuals and all the Levantine imports to Ancona, posing a threat to the city's economy. However, these letters only reached their destinations toward the end of April, so by which time the initial 12 conversos had already been executed. In response to the Sultan's communication on June the 1st, the Pope's stance was unequivocal. While the goods would be returned, the men, except those identifiable as Levantines, were to face punishment and execution for apostasy. Donna Gracia Nasi organized an international trade boycott of the port of Ancona by the communities of the Levant, diverting the commercial traffic to the smaller port of Pesaro. But the Pope proceeded to burn the remaining conversos, and this happened on the 4th of July, 1556. Again, in the Chronicle of Benjamin ben Nehemiah ben Nathan, we have the description of this specific event, which he allegedly saw himself with his own eyes. So among these conversos, there was a very important man, a relative of Gedalia ben Yachia, the author of the Shalshelet Kabbalah, so Shlomo Yachia. And Benjamin declares, so the Benjamin ben Nehemiah ben Nathan declares to have been an eyewitness of that terrible event. And he gives a detailed and heartbreaking description of the burning. I'm not entering into detail. You can read it because I'm running out of time. But it's very remarkable that these people, before approaching the stake, they were reciting the Shema Israel, and they were speaking Italian. So the author of the chronicle was listening them speaking Italian. And also Shlomo ibn Yachia talk to the people of Ancona in Italian. So so it is possible that this is true, that Benjamin Nehemiah was in Ancona due to his own business as a trader, as a merchant, as a money lender. And the details of the execution process are very specific, are very detailed. So we don't have. I really tend to exclude that this is something made up in the 19th century by someone else. But to the contrary, I think this is a veridical account. In the late 19th century, however, there was someone who tried unsuccessfully to dismiss the burning of the Portuguese conversos in Ancona. So it was a canon, it was a Catholic person, a Catholic priest named Cesare Garibaldi, was a pseudonym, was not his real name, who pretended that the Portuguese conversos burning at the stake was a pure fairy tale, that this event never happened. And this because at the time there were no archival documents from Ancona confirming the episode, but Jewish memory preserved the event very clearly, both in literature and in liturgy. And several Hebrew and Judeo-Italian sources describe the tragedy. So we have the chronicle by Benjamin Nehemiah ben Natan. We have other chronicles by Gedalia ben Yachia and Yosef Cohen, but we also have kinot. So poems, elegies for Tisha B'Av. They were composed by Jewish authors, such, for example, Jacob Fano from Ferrara, Shlomo Chazan of Ancona, and also Mordechai ben Yehuda of Blanes. So here you can see in the slide Ekina Oim Eshchachech Yerushalayim by Jacob Fano with a Judeo-Italian translation, Di te Yerushalayim già non mi posso scordare. That is from the Cecil Roth collection today at Leeds University Library. And this other kina, also from the collection of Cecil Roth, the kina Sorfei Ancona, Shebi Almanach Bet Avich, by Mordechai ben Yehuda of Blanes. So this particular kina by Blanes seems to have been resident in the Sephardic synagogue Pesaro during the morning service of Tisha B'Av. And in general, all these poems offer moving testimonies of the suffering of the conversos and the central role of Kiddush Hashem, the sanctification of God's name, in Jewish understandings of martyrdom. Even in the 19th century, the memory of the event was still alive in Ancona, and the city's chief rabbi, David Abraham Vivanti, wrote a special composition to be resident in the synagogue on Tisha B'Av, the day on which Jews mourn the destruction of the temple, the expulsion from Spain, and other tragedies. The episode also caught the attention of Christian writers. The chronicler Bartolomeo Alfei, that I already mentioned, confirmed both the number of victims and the dignity with which they faced their deaths. And here on the right side, we can see a commemorative plaque in Piazza Malatesta in Ancona, remembering the tragedy of the Marranos. So this is something back then they didn't know. So this politician, Giovanni Spadolini, was the former prime minister of Italy. And back then in 1992, when the plaque was posed, he was the president of the Italian Senate. So we have this commemorative plaque to remember the 500 years of the Sephardic diaspora. And 1556, the tragedy of the burning of the stake of Ancona. To conclude, the persecution of the Portuguese conversos in Ancona was not an isolated episode, but part of the wider anti-Jewish policies under Pope Paul IV. His pontificate marked a decisive turning point in the history of the Jews in the Papal States, characterized by segregation, censorship, forced conversions, and the tightening of inquisitorial control. Yet, the memory of these events did not disappear. It continued to shape Jewish historical consciousness, becoming a powerful symbol of resilience, communal solidarity, and the determination to preserve Jewish identity in the face of persecution. The commemorative plaque in Ancona, and even more, the written sources and the keynote still used today, still performed today, remind us that these events belong not only to the history of the 16th century, but also to the ongoing process of remembering, interpreting, and transmitting the Jewish past. Thank you very much.
Okay. Martina, thank you so much for your presentation. Really touched our heart. And I think that I agree this sentiment together with Rabbi Rosenblatt here. And we found that was really suitable to this week that we are close to the celebration of the 9th of Av, the Tisha B'Av, that is, as we saw by your presentation, so connected with the martyrdom of the people birthed in Ancona. And I want to add that these chronicles will find presence and exhibition in the new exhibition that we are going to set up during in this time, and we will inaugurate next year in the autumn. Everybody is invited to take part of the inauguration in the autumn of the next year, and specifically the martyrs of Ancona will part, and as is normal, also the important story of Grazia Nassi that lived in Ferrara for a while, just a couple of years, perhaps 3 years, but she left a very deep, important signs in our city. And perhaps Rabbi Rosenblatt want to add something about your presentation. I think that he is already still online. And
So
are
thank
you?
you. Well, thank you, Professor Mampieri. That was really fascinating. I was wondering if I could just ask you to reflect on two things. One is this story. I don't know if it's unique, but one of the features of the story is that Paul III and others had granted these merchants an assurance of safety, and then there's a reversal with Pope Paul IV, and this the feeling of safety, and then the contrast of being in the gravest of danger. Did that change the way in which Italian Jews thought about their future in Italy? Did that send them running for the Ottoman Empire? Did that send them running for Venice? That's question number one. And question number two is, it's fascinating to me that there were Christians who wanted to pretend that this was a fiction. And if maybe you could speak a little bit about what might have inspired various people to try and pretend this event didn't exist.
Thank you very much. Well, first question, did people run away? Some did. So most of the Sephardic Jews were passing through Ferrara and Ancona and then Pesaro, but Italy was not exactly the final destination. So the Ottoman Empire was. So Italy was often perceived as a passageway to the Ottoman Empire, and especially after Paul IV's turn. So lots of people changed, lots of people moved, and in the very beginning, for example, the Jews from Rome did not see the ghetto happening. So they didn't understand in the very beginning of July 1555, they didn't understand that the ghetto was happening. So they stayed. Also, Sephardic Jews stayed, and then in a couple of months, they found themselves locked in the ghetto. So some people managed to escape, some people remained. But the Sephardic Jews understood that Sephardic conversos, people whose background was not entirely clear to the church, they understood they were in danger. They were in real danger in front of the Inquisition. So this story of Cesare Garibaldi, I don't know much about it. I didn't find much because so he wrote a chronicle from his own perspective, from a Catholic perspective in the 19th century, saying that he didn't find any chronicles. He didn't find any evidence of the event. But of course, he never visited the archives. He didn't have access to Hebrew chronicles, and he couldn't know anything about it. So he simply said, "I didn't find the sources, so the story is completely invented." But he was someone who didn't have knowledge of Hebrew, and it was someone who didn't have knowledge of many things. So yeah, it's complete rubbish from the 19th century.
It was 19th century Holocaust denial.
Yeah.
You know, um,
There
fascinating.
there is a question on the chat that
Oh,
has
okay.
the church ever publicly renounced the persecution and burning of the Jews? My best knowledge wasn't any specific statement of the church about the martyrdom of the Jews there in Ancona. There were very famous declaration of Pope Giovanni Paolo II about all the acts, anti-Semitic acts in the past that the church pursued against the Jews, but specifically on the Jews of Ancona, I don't know. Perhaps Martina knows better than me.
No, as far as I remember, no. But I can reply to the immediate after question that was about what happened with the following popes after Pope Carafa, because the following popes did not have the same attitude toward the Jews in general, but they never formally dismantled the ghettos. They never formally abolished the communis absurdum. So they also aligned with the anti-Jewish policies of Paul IV. And so this also explains that there was no formal denial or denunciation and renunciation of the persecution immediately after Paul IV, even though Pius IV was perceived as a positive pope. Then Pius V, so Pius IV is the immediate successor of Paul IV. He was elected on Christmas Day of 1559, and he stayed in power for a couple of years, and then he was succeeded by Pius V, who was the spiritual heir of Paul IV. So Pius V is someone who was also aggressive toward the Jews, and he expelled all the Jews from the state of the church, with the exception of Rome, Ancona, and Avignon, with with another ball, so the Ebreorum gens sola. So it really depended on the pope, but we can say that some popes were more tolerant, some other popes were stricter. But we didn't have, as far as I remember, we didn't have a formal act of forgiveness, a reconciliation with the burning of the Jews in Ancona.
I just add to this that the relationship between the church and the Jews is extremely complicated. The Going back to the church had an official policy called the doctrine of witness from St. Augustine, which essentially says don't hurt the Jews because they are the witnesses that verify the Old Testament. but at the same time, they supported the blood libel. At the same time, they had various other narratives that Jews were responsible for the death of innocents. That's why we're against Jesus. If you go to the Cathedral of Notre Dame, for example, you'll see the picture of the Jew who is blind, who cannot appreciate Jesus, who is dropping the Ten Commandments. The Christian propaganda against Jews is deep and broad, and and the events that led to these pogroms and the preaching of friars like Vincent Ferrer that lead to this mass conversion in Spain in 1391, that's really what gives birth ultimately to the Inquisition, the expulsion of the Jews from Spain, the conversion, the forced conversion of the Jews in Portugal. You have to understand that the people who were burnt at the stake, Professor Montier, you correct me if I'm wrong, the people who were burnt at the stake very possibly were converted because their children were forcibly converted by a forced baptism in Portugal.
Yeah.
And so they never, it's not even a forced conversion. These were people whose parents were sprinkled with water. Somebody said something in Latin, proof you became Christian. And so they had almost no control over themselves. The church never exercised careful application of its own laws. And even modern popes like John Paul II, I can't pronounce him in Hebrew as well, and in Italian as well as Rabbi Spagnoletto, but he visits Auschwitz and he prays for the Jews who have not accepted Jesus while looking over the graves of the dust of the gas chambers, of the ashes of the crematorium, and without fully appreciating how much Christian anti-Semitism led to that moment. It's very, very complicated, and it's something that I don't know whether the church can fully embrace. To me, it's a very rich moment to have the Pope, an American Pope, preach to Israel about how to defend Jews when the church has such a dark history like what we see from Professor Montieri. On that note, I want to tell you, though, about the third installment of this shared project between Schara Tzedeck and the museum. One of the most inspiring stories of the Jewish people in Italy and Israel is the story of the Jewish Brigade. And this is a story of Jews who fought in the Royal Army against the Nazis in northern Italy. And many of them are buried in Italian cemeteries. And to the best of my knowledge, the only remaining uniform of one of these soldiers is now held by this museum in Ferrara. I don't want to tell you too much about the story. It is really one of the most inspiring stories of the past 100 years. It is a really, really remarkable story, and it is particularly good for us because it's a merging of the story of the Commonwealth, Remembrance Day, Israel, and the fight against the Nazis. And so we're looking forward to, we haven't set the date yet for that, but that will probably be the Sunday before Remembrance Day. We'll do a similar kind of a project where we'll be able to learn about the stories of this Jewish Brigade. Really fascinating. I also just want to extend my thanks to Professor Mampieri. You don't appreciate how much expertise goes into being able to verify this story. You have to be able to speak Hebrew and Italian and Latin and to and be able to handle massive amounts of information, understand the history, the context, the language, find these documents in the archives. Really, it's a tremendous gift for us to be able to have her knowledge, her expertise. Thank you also for such a beautiful presentation and tempting us to see these beautiful synagogues in Ancona. I hope everybody enjoyed as much as I did. Thank you so much.
Me
Thank
too.
you.
Me too, anch'io ringrazio Martina per questo bell'intervento, davvero con tutto quanto il cuore, e do appuntamento the meeting. The next meeting will be on the Jewish Brigade, and it's going to be in a couple of months ahead. And thank you for Andy Rosenblatt for be a very good partner of our museum, and to all the audience, a good evening and good morning for everybody. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much.